Okay, so we said that horseshoe crabs haven't evolved in 500 million years because they're at equilibrium. And we said that the things that kick a species out of equilibrium are if they have mutations, migrations, if they have a real tiny little population, they can evolve by accident. Oops, we evolved. Oops, we shifted our gene frequencies. But the other one is if they're doing any form of selective mating. Because Hardy-Weinberg says all mating has to be random in order for a population to not be evolving. So what species mate randomly? Well, has anybody ever gone swimming in the ocean? Okay. If you ever get a chance, you should. 6 hours and 25 minutes if you don't pee, you can be in Delaware. Now, there are no corals in Delaware, but corals are these really cool marine organisms. They look like that. And corals, when they mate, well, if you go to a coral reef during coral mating season, you'll notice that the water's cloudy. Do you know why the water's cloudy? Because they're all releasing eggs and sperm at the same time. So it's really just egg and sperm soup. Now, do they know which egg, which sperm will fertilize? Heck no. They shoot it out into the ocean and let the currents do the rest. Some of it obviously just drifts away and gets wasted. Some of it ends up meeting its target. So that's lucky. Anybody have pine trees at their house? Me too. We have a row of white pines, and in the spring, we have a problem. Because we have a little table on the back porch, and in the spring, every single time you go out, if you want to sit and eat dinner on the porch, you have to wipe the table down because it's covered in this yellow dust, and the car is covered in yellow dust. And you know what the yellow dust is, right? Plant sperm! Anybody have a pollen allergy? So here's a great way to meet friends and start conversations. You walk into a crowd one spring day when you've got a runny nose and drippy red eyes, and you go, man, this plant sperm is killing me. I can guarantee, well, no. Does this explain my problems making friends? They'll either be really fascinated by you or they'll just move away from you quietly. It's just sperm. And I think I've already told you that you should definitely walk into the house in the spring when the cars are covered with pollen and say, Mom, there's sperm all over the car. No, Mom.
I did it with my dad. He's like, I already know that.
I like him. And then, of course, you can say, Mom, I meant plant sperm. Ew, that's just, what were you thinking, Mom? I can't believe you. Plant sperm, Mom. Oh, honestly, Mom. So, yeah, and that pollen just drifts on the wind in a lot of species. Nobody knows who it fertilizes. Those pine trees might fertilize pine cones on that tree. They might fertilize pine cones down the block. It depends on how strong the wind is, how far they carry, if they land on my car. In which case, they fertilize no one.
Don't bees help?
Well, with some species, we were just going to get there. So those are things that are wind pollinated. With things that are insect pollinated, there is some level of selection because the bees are going for the best flowers. They're going for things that are attractive to bees. But there's still an element of the random in which, because if you've ever seen bees coming back from a hive or back from flowers, they have what are called baskets, these little structures on their legs, and they will be just packed with yellow powder. And which bit of pollen falls off in which flower, there's still some randomness. But yeah, with insect-pollinated species, it's not as random. So here's the thing. If you're not mating randomly, guess what? You are using criteria to select your mate. And they're different criteria, so let's look at those. Most species actually do use some kind of criteria for mate selection. There are 3 that we're going to talk about. Mating with the close, mating with who's available nearby, proximity selection, mating with those that look like you, assertive, mating with the sexy, mating with those with good traits, and we don't know why they're good, but we'll talk about that. So proximity selection is mating with those that are close to you. And this is literally marrying the girl next door, marrying the boy next door. Well, I don't know. He was always there, so I guess I figured I'd marry him. Happens. This happens in a lot of animal species. The likelihood of one of those frogs from Pymatuning up in Ashtabula County mating with a frog from a pond in Columbiana County is pretty much zero, short of some serious human intervention. I'm going to put you in my car, and I'm going to take you here, and I'm going to let you sing for the ladies down here. So animals do tend to engage in proximity selection. A lot of plants engage in proximity selection. If we think about those wind or insect pollinated plants, bees travel a good distance, but they're not going to travel from Ohio to Indiana in search of pollen. So plants are going to tend, even the wind pollinated or insect pollinated ones, to end up mating with plants that are relatively near them. Those wind pollinated species, these trees out here, we got a lot of oaks along the property line here. They're going to drop pollen in the spring, and it's going to blow, but there's a limit to how far it can blow. Might pollen from one of these oak trees end up across the street? Yeah, it might. It's probably not going to end up in Boardman, carried on the wind. Maybe it could, but it's unlikely. So proximity selection comes in where you're looking at mates that are close to you. And most species, to one degree or another, do this. Now, interestingly enough, humans have kind of broken this, haven't we? How have we broken this? So I'll give you an example. I had one friend. He was in the Navy. He had traveled around the world and came back, finished his degree, and somewhere in his mid-20s, life kind of fell apart, and he thought, yeah, what the heck, I'll sell all my stuff and go to China. And he did. He sold all his stuff. He packed a backpack. He got on a plane. He got a job teaching English in China. He was going to be there for 2 years. Well, he and his very lovely Chinese wife now live, and it's somewhere it's like in Siberia, I think. I don't know where it is. I'm real fuzzy on the details. But, he ended up marrying somebody from all the way around the world. That wasn't possible for a lot of human history. For a lot of human history, people didn't go more than a few miles from the place that they were born. Their mates came from that same area. I have another friend who was in the Peace Corps, went to Africa, was going to spend 5 years in Africa, came back 13 years later with a wife and 2 kids. He married an African woman who lived in the village he was working in, and now they have 4 kids, and they live in Warren. He teaches high school science. But that's, we have broken proximity selection because we're such a global species that we can do that. So we don't always do proximity selection for humans. Now, this is the one that makes people go, ah. Anybody know a couple who look like one another? Get mistaken for siblings? Happens a lot. It happens because of assortive mating. So I had a friend who was one of 9, 10, I don't know. And he was one of the younger ones. At one point he was dating a woman who looked, you put her in the lineup with his siblings and you could not pick out who were the siblings and who was his date. They were a big Italian family. They were all big dark eyes, dark hair, and she, even like facial shape, she just kind of fit in. They didn't end up getting married. He ended up marrying somebody who looked nothing like anybody in his family. But for a while there, you could have put them all together and you wouldn't have been able to pick out who were the siblings.
I dated someone who looks like me. They must be gorgeous.
Well, obviously, we all have our biases. So this concept of assortive mating is weirder than you think, because it's not just people who look like you. So let me tell you about some geese. This is a goose experiment. This was done, I remember reading about this 20 years ago, 30. I remember reading about this as a teenager, so it was a long time ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. They took white geese, and they painted their feathers pink for some of them. And they had mated pairs who were painted pink, and they had babies, and they painted the babies pink. And these were white geese who they painted. These were not pink geese. This is not a genetic trait. Then they had some other geese, white geese, who they painted blue, and they let them have babies, and when the babies hatched, they painted them blue. And they let the geese do their little goosey thing, eating bugs, swimming around, chasing things. That's what geese do. Well, when these baby geese grew up and were presented with both pink and blue geese to choose mates from, guess what color geese they chose? Pink. When these blue geese were presented with choices of mates, pink, blue, white, they chose blue. Well, then they took a second set. And they had pink parents, and when they had babies who were white geese, they painted the babies blue. The blue parents, when they had babies and they hatched, they painted them pink. They let the geese do their geese thing, eating bugs, chasing stuff, swimming around. When these babies grew up and were presented with options for mates, guess what color mates they preferred? Pink. Because a lot of our ideas about what it means to be a member of whatever species we are formed by the people we see around us when we're little. So you don't necessarily choose mates who look just like you, but you often choose mates who look like your siblings, your parents, the people who are around you all the time, because that's where you formed your image of what's sort of like the ideal human thing. That's what you've seen as sort of the base model. Everything that differs from that is sort of like, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, humans aren't all that different. We're talking about slight differences in, coloration, hair, skin, eyes. But in other species, this is a pretty big deal. If you look at chickens, and there's a lot of variation in, oh my God, this would be a fantastic stem fair experiment. Oh, who has chickens? Oh my God, this would be fantastic. I would totally extend the registration deadline for you if you wanted to do it. I want to do this, and I can't have chickens where I live right now. So you take, oh my gosh, yeah. So you take a couple different varieties of starkly different colored chickens, rear the chicks with like opposite coloration parents, and see if this effect extends. Of course, roosters are so aggressive. How would you control for that? Because the chickens don't get to do a whole lot of choosing. It's not all that selective. It's kind of like chicken rape. I hate roosters. I hate them. But you could do something similar. You could do some kind of experimentation with a bird breed. Like if you had, what are some of the other, quail? Nobody raises quail. Probably not a whole lot of color variation in quail. They're delicious. But yeah, this is this concept of assortative mating, that animals tend to choose mates that look like the individuals that they were surrounded with, and by extension, that look like them. So, whoops, that's assortative mating. Now, we get to the question that you've all really wanted to know the answer to. What did does want? What did does want? You know what does want? Big racks!
I just dropped one.
I forget, I searched like 14-point buck or something. I don't know, you can count them.
I have a 10-point on my trail cam, but I can never find
Okay,
it.
so what did does want? A big rack! Why? Because if you are a doe, it is dead sexy. You look at that buck with his giant, gazillion point rack, and you're like, oh, that's the one. That is him. That is the buck that will fertilize my eggs. Yup. Why? You counting? Okay. Why? Why is this sexy? Okay, so let's get into why it might be sexy. So let's talk about what sexual selection is. Sexual selection is mating with some other, your mate has good traits. Good traits. Well, what's good? Well, apparently for does, a big rack. So you're saying, well, the doe wants the big rack because he can protect her. Do does and bucks hang out together most of the year? No. It's pretty much wham, bam, you go your way, I'm going to go my way. She raises those fawns on her own. The bucks are not involved in parental care.
There's no child support?
No child support whatsoever. Remember, Bambi did not know his father. Huh? But why does he get to reproduce versus a little tiny puny 2-point? Because he can fight off the other bucks. And in deer, what we see is that males engage in really aggressive battles during mating season. Oh, during the rut, they're hideous, horrible, aggressive, violent with one another. And the biggest rack wins. You know, that's the biggest weapon. You're bringing the biggest knife to the fight here. Now, what that means, so what does that mean for her? Why is that good for her? Who cares if he can beat the snot out of that guy? Why does that matter for her?
Maybe the trees.
Well, her eggs are her future. That's her genetic investment that she's going to get into the next generation. She wants her baby to have a big rack because then her baby gets to breed does, if it's a boy, and then her baby gets to pass on her genes. So having a partner who can get your genes into the next and the next and the next and the next generation because they've got such awesome traits their offspring are going to keep getting to reproduce is a huge advantage for you. So let's talk about another really sexy male. This guy. Isn't that sexy? I don't see it. I just don't see it. But peahens think this is dead sexy. This is a peacock. You all knew that. Anybody have peacocks at home?
My neighbor had one, but it died.
Okay. And I had a student last year who had one. Now, interestingly enough, we all have seen the word peacock as one word for so long that we think it's one word. It's not. Cock is the term for a male bird among peafowl, which are what these are. So you have peahens and peacocks. Among pheasants, you have hen pheasants and cock pheasants. But this male has got some baggage, as far as I can see. He's glorious, isn't he? I mean, who has seen them live walking around? Good. They drag, well, the males?
I think the males do.
The females do. The females do. We looked this up last period. You can look it up. So the male's got this big showy display. Why does he have this big showy display? Because the females think it's sexy. Why do the females think it's sexy? No one knows. No one knows. I mean, seriously, it's pretty. I get that. I don't understand why it makes them want to let him fertilize their eggs. But it does. So here's the question I have. Looking at this guy, you know, according to members of their own species, they are sexy. Is there a disadvantage here to being sexy for him? Is there a downside to his sexiness?
Small bit.
What?
His rack will stick out.
Okay, his rack sticks out. Anybody here? Huh? He's a target. Oh, yeah. I mean, in the current environment, because the current dominant predator for deer in this region of the world is humans, and somebody would love to put his head on their wall. So he's a big target. So there's that. The fact that his rack makes him a desirable target for his predator species. Anybody here ever run through the woods with a chandelier tied to their head? Just last
Oh, it's
weekend.
going to get caught on everything.
Well, okay, it's heavy. I can't imagine running through underbrush with that thing on my head. Like, I get snagged up just walking, but that may just be my problem. Sometimes I fall down. It's okay. That's heavy and cumbersome. And there's one other thing. Remember the cost-benefit analysis? We looked at Franklin Teeny with his third leg, and he had to eat like 100 extra calories a day. Does that require extra calories? And he stinking grows it every year? I find that to be the most ridiculous thing from an evolutionary perspective I have ever heard. Nobody asked me when deer were evolving, gee, Moser, should we grow it every year or just keep it? Because if they had asked, of course, I would have said just keep the darn thing. Yeah, every single year he's got to consume enough calories to regrow that rack. That's crazy. It's a huge, I see all kinds of disadvantages. But hey, at least the ladies think you're sexy. Now, what about that guy? Any disadvantage? bright colors. You know what that looks like to me? Looks like a flashing neon sign saying, I am right here. I am tasty and crunchy and feathery. You should eat me. It looks like dinner. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't stand out. I mean, we talk about species that have camouflage so that they aren't seen by predators. This is the opposite. This is anti-camouflage. This is walking around with like glow sticks strapped to your body. So there's that. There's also, and you're saying you've seen male peacocks fly.
Pretty sure it was a male.
Okay. I mean, the females are weak flyers is what we found, but I can't imagine flying with that whole thing dragging behind you. Have you seen them fly?
No, I was gonna say that
They're not aerodynamic.
No.
No. I mean, turkeys are weak flyers too, if you've seen wild turkeys fly.
Block in the sky.
But yeah, this is kind of like throwing a brick. You know, like it's not a flightless bird, but it's pretty close. So if your species is doing if your population is engaging in some sort of selection of mates, what does that mean? It means you're probably evolving. What are bucks evolving towards? What are big racks? Because that's who gets the ladies. What are peacocks evolving towards? Big tails, because that's what gets the ladies. What are frogs evolving towards? Better singing ability, because that's what gets the ladies. In all these species, notice that the females are the ones doing the picking. Interesting. Males show off, females get to select. And that pattern varies. We talked about it with the blue eyes. It depends on the ratio of one sex to the other, but very often there's an element of female selection in a lot of species. And of course in plants it's mostly random. Okay, so here's the deal. You got a test on Friday. Yay! Well, it's that or we go away to break, and that doesn't usually work out well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you your study guide now. We've covered all the ideas on the front of the study guide. I want you to finish the front of the study guide for tomorrow. There's one question on the back that we've already talked about. It's out of order. Oops. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about natural selection patterns, and that's kind of what we're going to cover tomorrow, and that's the back of the study guide. So I'm going to give you the rest of the time. Pull out your vocab, Part C. I'll hand you the study guide, and you can work on that. Study guides will be due Friday when you walk in, along with Part C. So questions, comments, concerns? Yes, ma'am.